I would like to welcome you here on behalf of the Roundtable. I'm the chair of the editorial board of the Roundtable. We are really delighted that we have today the Right Honourable Helen Clark to speak to us. We've been trying to fix a date, and little did we know, of course, when we'd fixed the date, that the intervening time would be the Christchurch terrorist attack, and I think we're all still very much mindful of that. And the suffering in New Zealand, which has been worldwide acknowledged. So I think we are very grateful that you're here, especially in the wake of Christchurch. Helen Clark has a very distinguished career as New Zealand's 37th Prime Minister, the 5th longest serving Prime Minister, and the second woman. Having been elected to Parliament in 1981, she served as Prime Minister from 1999 to 2008. She is currently she was, following that, Administrator of the UN Development Programme until 2017, and she is now patron of the Helen Clark Foundation. Among her many other awards, in 2010, she was a member of the Order of New Zealand, New Zealand's highest award. And in 2017, she received the Lifetime Achievement Award at the New Zealand Women of Influence Awards ceremony. We are going to be in conversation with Helen Clark with Keshini Navaratnam. And Keshini has a long-standing career with the BBC as a World TV news anchor.
Helen Clark, you've spent your career closely connected with the Commonwealth. How relevant do you feel it is to today's world?
Well, that was a question I was asked a lot when I came in the big week around Choggum in April last year. And it was a wonderful week because it had the Women's Forum, the Youth Forum, the Civil Society Forum, all of which I went to, the Business Forum, somewhere the other side of town. And I think a bit of the answer lies in that, doesn't it? When I used to go to Choggums, I never used to see that. Going back, to an earlier decade, we were much more a heads of government meeting, and I think the Business Council was somewhere. But to see now all the ancillary meetings tells me that the Commonwealth knows that civil society is extremely important, that the women of the Commonwealth must have voice, the youth must have voice, the civil society generally. So that would be my first point. I see a much more reaching out than the traditional Commonwealth did. Secondly, of course, I bring a small country perspective to this, because for a small country like New Zealand, which frankly cannot afford to have diplomatic missions in every country of the world, maybe we're in somewhere between a quarter and a third, but we're not like the United Kingdom that can have an embassy or post almost everywhere. So for us, the international gatherings, like a Choggum Leaders Summit or the Education Ministers meeting for the Commonwealth, etc., these become very important windows on the world for us, particularly in regions where we're not so well represented diplomatically. The Commonwealth network and family is extremely important to us. Thirdly, the Commonwealth, among the kind of family of nations groupings, is unique in having the good governance mandate, the Harare Declaration, actually having the Commonwealth Ministerial Action Group picking up issues of countries that are going through troubled times, having some mechanisms to deal with that. And I think that's a precious thing too, because if you're going to have a values community, then there need to be some standards in that. So for all those reasons, I think it is relevant. I was part of a very interesting conversation last night convened at Marlborough House with people from the Muslim family within the Commonwealth and in civil society here. And our conversation went along the lines of perhaps a stepped up role the Commonwealth could take is in explicitly taking on the issues of diverse societies needing to live alongside each other in peace, regardless of our backgrounds, ethnicity, faith, belief. We're one human family. And could the Commonwealth explicitly take on some of the issues which are causing such concern? I mean, obviously I'm speaking with Christchurch very much in my mind, where the attack was pretty terrible and exhibited obviously a high degree of Islamophobia, a much debated issue now, and rightly so.
But there have been very critical volleys against the Commonwealth, issues like human rights, issues like the non-observation of the very values that the Commonwealth espouses. Do you think that really serves to undermine the credibility of this association?
Well, I mean, I'm not in the business of naming names, but you can think around the Commonwealth family, and clearly, there are states where there are troubling situations with respect to human rights. One, for example, has just introduced a new penal code providing for death by stoning for Muslims, not for non-Muslims in the society, of where people are convicted of gay sex or adultery. Now, this is a terrible, terrible move with respect to human rights, and this is troubling. I think the issue of LGBTQI rainbow rights is one that a number of Commonwealth countries have yet to address from a human rights perspective, but there are obviously other human rights issues as well, which not everybody's living up to well.
But of course, the Commonwealth has this unique platform for developing countries. It has a unique platform for smaller states, which can't express the same kind of views in the context of, say, the UN. Do you think that really is something that the Commonwealth should hang on to above all else?
So, in my advocacy for the Commonwealth, I point out that it has been an incredibly important voice for small states, and within that grouping for small island developing states. It has a great many as members across the great oceans, Indian Ocean, across the Caribbean and the Pacific. And so it has supported countries with advocacy around WTO negotiations. It's also been an important voice on climate action, which is an existential threat for the small island developing states. So I think you'll find among small states, that they do feel the Commonwealth is a voice for them. And it's often hard to be heard as a small state, so to have a major international organisation pick up the causes and run with them is important. There was another issue too that the Commonwealth was very supportive on in my time at UNDP, and that was on the issue of development financing for small island developing states who are very exposed to risk in the form of major disasters connected with climate. And you can become, in development speak, a middle-income country like Vanuatu, but this does not stop you being wiped out by Cyclone Pam. If you're Dominica, you're a middle-income country, been wiped out by a major storm twice within 3 to 4 years, and you cannot borrow commercially to recover from this. You're stripped out. And so the Commonwealth was a voice, along with UNDP, and CARICOM, and the Pacific Island Forum, and the OECD DAC chair, Eric Solheim, for lobbying at the development banks to take a broader view of vulnerability. So not just to measure, whether or not a country was low or middle income in terms of concessional lending, but to have a vulnerability weighting, recognising that if you're a small island developing state in the path of major weather events, you always have that existential threat, and you will need help when you have a major disaster, regardless of your supposed income status.
But it sounds as if you're still a remarkable advocate for multilateral organisations and the good that they can do.
Because I come from a small country, and small countries have no power and might, right? They only have the power of their voice in international negotiations and forums, and that's how you try to influence world events. So for small countries like New Zealand, you know, what were our forums? Obviously the UN, but you're one of 193. The Commonwealth, you're one of, you know, roughly a quarter of that. The APEC community, the Pacific Island Forum. I mean, as a small state, you value these platforms.
I'd like also to have a look at another issue which I know is very close to your heart, that of gender equality. You, as have a number of female leaders, have spoken out recently very strongly, regretting the fact that more progress has not been made on this critical issue. What do you think needs to be done? I mean, it's not just the Commonwealth's failure on this particular issue. It's also, obviously, the UN has failed to make real progress in countries like Afghanistan.
Well, you know, just thinking back to the 4 CHOGMs that I went to, I'm not sure that there was ever more than 2 other women in the room at most, and sometimes they weren't there either. So it would be me, either Sheikh Hasina or the leader of the other Bangladesh party, which has been in government, also female, and the Prime Minister of Dominica. And I really struggled to think beyond that. And as I say, they weren't always there. So that, in a way, was emblematic of the global situation. When I went to the UN Millennium Summit in 2000 in New York, Mary Robinson, who of course had been President of Ireland and was then the UN Human Rights Commissioner, decided to convene a meeting of women heads of government and women in the top posts at the UN. And I say that we wouldn't have fitted in one telephone box, but we would have fitted in 2, if anyone can remember what a telephone box was like before we had the cell phone. Anyway, I mean, it's pathetic. Now, even today, you know, we're looking at under 6% of the world's prime ministers are female. Under 8% of the world's heads of state are female, and that includes queens, by the way. So, you know, it's not good. And the World Economic Forum does an annual gender gap report, and they have reported regressions. The 2017 report, I think they reported regression on every dimension they measure, which is across politics, education, health and the economy. And with so few women leaders, you've only got to lose 1 or 2 or 3, and suddenly, proportion-wise, it has quite a dramatic effect. So, you know, I spend a bit of my time advocating for women to step up to leadership positions. And the first step on that ladder is contesting elected office for many, whether it's the local council, whether it's a state legislature, whether it's a national parliament. But we have to be there. We can't decry the paucity of women's leadership if women aren't, you know, getting into the fight. And I'm not pretending it will be easy. I've had to elbow my way in as well. But we need to have the networks of support which will make it possible for many more to come in. You know, one of the Commonwealth family, the Solomon Islands, has just had elections. I went up to the Solomon Islands in August to take part in a big conference of women aspiring to be candidates in the Solomons. And they had 2 women MPs. Well, I think there were 2 elected in the last week. I mean, you know, what is this? It's 2 out of 50. So, and women in the Solomons have a lot of issues they'd like to have addressed, but they're just not making it through.
Another subject. We can't sit here in London and not talk about the Brexit issue, the B word. What's your perspective on it from a Commonwealth point of view? Tell me, do you feel that Commonwealth nations feel let down by the whole process of Brexit, particularly those who gained access to Europe through the UK?
Well, there's such a history to this for New Zealand, because when Britain went into the European Union, my recollection is that 70% of New Zealand exports went to the United Kingdom. This was a radical shock to New Zealand. We had to diversify our markets very, very rapidly. And I mean, who knows what proportion goes to Britain today? Maybe it's 5 or 6 or 7. It sure isn't 70%. I could see Luke McMahon from New Zealand Trade. What's the proportion of New Zealand exports that comes in? 5, 6, 7. You know.
You've been put on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, it's not much. So we reoriented our trade. And those of you with long memories may remember the debate on British entry, where there was a huge constituency for New Zealand in the House of Commons and the Lords, and people said, poor little New Zealand, it fed us through the war and we're going into a union which is abandoning them. Anyway, I mean, having been abandoned, we've got on and made our luck and diversified our trade. But one thing we could always count on was that Britain was a voice for us within the Union. And I think if the decision to exit holds, and who knows whether it will or whether it won't, but if it does, we have to beef up other friendships. But they're not the same depth of friendship as we've had with the United Kingdom. Because, New Zealanders of my generation, European descent and Maori descent, a very high proportion of us have links to the United Kingdom. We know where our forebears came from. I have 2 grandfathers born in the British Isles. I mean, there's been a deep affinity with this country, and that's played out, with the friendships and support we've had, and whether it's been Whitehall, governments irrespective of political colour, the House of Commons, and so on. We will be missing a friend, and we'll be scrambling to strengthen the other relationships. Germany, the Dutch, Sweden have been good friends on a lot of the trade issues, but we need to broaden the Kiwi constituency in the EU. And I suspect that the African, Caribbean and Pacific countries will be thinking, how do we strengthen the networks we have? Obviously Australia and Canada also. So that voice will be missing in a pretty important forum for us.
Tell me one final idea. You're a very experienced negotiator. You oversaw those historic negotiations with China for New Zealand, brought an enormous benefit to the country. How do you think Theresa May has handled her set of negotiations?
Well, I mean, she's been dealt a very bad deck of cards, hasn't she? Really. And isn't it interesting how when in crisis, they turn to a woman. So Cameron exits fast, and Theresa's given the hospital pass. And trying to look at it as objectively as we can, the EU ain't that easy to negotiate with either. Right? They've got their template. And I have seen this from the other angle, because UNDP has worked alongside all the accession countries coming into the European Union. All that tranche that came in 1995, post the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact and Soviet Union and so on. And more recently, the Bulgaria, Romania, Croatian, a big part of UNDP's program in the Balkans and Eastern Europe today is around how they clear the hoops for EU accession. So I know how rigid the template is. You jump over this bar, this bar, this bar. And the truth is that if Britain was going to negotiate an exit, it was the demandeur, and it was 1 against 27. And the 27 didn't want to make it easy for anyone else to leave. So the bargain is hard. But none of these sort of insights really seem to influence the debate about Brexit in the first place. So, maybe, Theresa May has done the best she can, but it's interesting how the age-old Irish question has come to be, again, such a pivotal question.
Many more discussions will continue. Helen Clark, thank you so much for a wonderful session.